Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. I'm James, and this is actually my first video as the developer of a new platform called Certifyr. I wanted to start by sharing a bit of the story behind it. So before I ever started building software, my background was in education in the medical space. And one thing that really stayed with me over the years was how much good training was being held together by clunky assessment admin behind the scenes. I spent a lot of time around education that really mattered. The kind where it wasn't just good enough to deliver training and move on. You needed to know who'd done it, how they'd been assessed, what had been recorded, what certificate had been issued, and whether the whole thing would actually hold up if someone looked closely at it. And the frustration that I kept running into was that I just couldn't find a system that brought all of this together in a way that actually made sense. You could find tools that did bits of it, something for building assessments, something else for storing questions, something else again for certificates or records. But trying to find one platform that would let me properly manage a question vault, build assessments from that content, and handle certification all under one roof, it was way harder than it should have been. And I kept coming back to the same thought. Why is this still so hard? Why are good teams still piecing together across different tools, different files, different workflows, when it really should be one connected process? Because from the outside, a lot of it looked fine. Training was happening, assessments were going out, certificates were being issued. So on the surface, it looked like the machine was working. But when you were actually really close to it, you could see how much manual effort it was taking to keep things aligned. The questions were in one place, the assessments were built somewhere else, and the candidate records were in another system. Certificates were handled separately, and basically reporting was pulled together later or bolted on at the end. And none of those things on their own seemed massive, but together they created this constant drag, this constant friction where every part of the workflow felt slightly disconnected from the next. And honestly, that's the bit I couldn't stop thinking about. Not because people were doing a bad job, it was usually quite the opposite. They were doing a really good job in spite of the workflow. They were remembering things the system should have remembered, checking things the system should have made obvious, and manually connecting steps that really should have been connected by default. And for me, a big turning point was realizing I wasn't just frustrated by messy admin. I was frustrated that I couldn't find a system that built the way I felt it should have been built. I wanted a proper question vault, not just a folder full of files. I wanted to be able to build assessments from that same source of truth. And I wanted certification to be part of the same workflow, not some separate process hanging off the side at the end. That combination, done properly, was surprisingly hard to find. And after running into that frustration enough times, I got to the point where I thought, stuff it. I'm just going to build the thing I wish already existed. And that's what pushed me to build Certifyr. So this is Certifyr. And really, the whole idea behind it is pretty simple. I wanted to build one system that brings the assessment workflow together properly, not just one part of it, the whole thing. This is the product that came out of that frustration. So when I talk about Certifyr, I'm really talking about three core things. First, having a proper question vault. Because if the content lives everywhere, everything downstream gets harder. Second, being able to actually build and deliver assessments from that same system. Not export things from one place and rebuild them in another. And third, managing records and certifications as part of the same workflow so the process stays connected all of the way through. So the import section here, I'm going to stop here because this part is a big part for me. I kept seeing teams with plenty of content already. The issue really was that there wasn't a lack of questions. It was that those questions were buried in old documents, spreadsheets, folders, and previous versions. So one of the key ideas behind Certifyr was creating a proper question vault where that content could actually live in a structured way and be reused properly. Not just stored, actually used. For me, this had to start with the content foundation. And this is also where features like the smart AI imports start to matter. Because a big part of speeding up the workflow isn't just storing questions better, it's reducing the time it takes to bring existing content into a usable system in the first place. So instead of manually pulling things apart from old files, rebuilding everything from scratch, smart AI import helps bring that content in faster and gets you moving sooner. We'll go into that properly in another video, but it's a big part of the workflow story for Certifyr. So this is the workflow here. So from there, the next piece is the assessment creation itself, because this was another pain point I kept running into. Even when teams had the content, there was still a disconnect between having questions and actually turning them into usable assessment workflow. So this side of Certifyr is really about making that process feel connected. Build from the same source of truth, keep it structured, make it easy to manage, and stop forcing people to rebuild things manually. This is where having the right structure starts to matter. So one of the other features that fits into the same idea is this rubric marking, this AI rubric marking. So because workflow doesn't just slow down at the content and build stage, it also slows down when marking becomes inconsistent, manual, or harder to scale than it needs to be. So having a rubric-based marking built into this workflow is another important part of speeding up the workflow while keeping things more structured and consistent. That's especially important when you're dealing with response types that need more than simple auto marking. Again, we'll cover that in more detail in a separate video, but it's another example of trying to remove friction from the overall process, not just one small piece of it. And then there's certification and records. This mattered a lot to me because I kept seeing certification treated as a separate admin task at the end. Assessments happen over there, results live over here, and certificates get handled at some other point. And someone has to manually connect all of that. I never thought that made much sense at all. So with Certifyr, the goal was to keep the assessment, the result, the record, and the certificate connected under one roof, because that's how the workflow should feel. I never wanted certification to feel bolted on at the end. And beyond that, a big part of the thinking here was visibility. If you're running training and assessments properly, you shouldn't have to go chasing across multiple systems just to understand what's happening. You should be able to see the workflow clearly, what's been built, what's been assigned, what's been completed, what's been passed, what's been certified. That kind of visibility matters, not just for the admin, but for confidence overall. You shouldn't need 3 systems and a spreadsheet just to understand what's going on. And really, that's where Certifyr came from. It came from seeing too many good teams doing too much manual work. A real question vault, real assessment building from the same content, and certification managed under the same roof. That's what I wanted. And when I couldn't find it in a way that felt right, that's what pushed me to build Certifyr. So not because I wanted to build software for the sake of it, but because I'd seen the friction up close. I dealt with that friction and felt the frustration myself, and knew that the workflow could be cleaner and simpler and much more connected than what I kept running into. So with these videos, that's what I want to unpack properly. Not just what Certifyr does, but the problems that led to it, the gaps that I kept running into, and why I think assessment delivery has been more fragmented than it needs to be for a very long time. What's exciting now is that Certifyr's new features are starting to push this workflow forward in a way I genuinely don't think we've really seen before in this space. Features like smart AI import and smart rubric marking aren't just nice add-ons, they're huge time savers. They're part of a much bigger shift towards making assessment workflows faster, more connected, and far less manual than they've been traditionally. And that's what I'm looking forward to showing more of in these videos. Not just how Certifyr works, but how these newer features are helping move assessment delivery to a completely different level. So if any of that sounds familiar for you guys, please follow along. In the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the hidden costs of running assessments across multiple tools and why something like Certifyr, can help in these situations to not only speed up workflow time, but reduce the amount of manual effort needed by users themselves. If you'd like to sign up and come along the journey with me, the website is certifyr.io. And there's a free tier associated with Certifyr currently. So you can have 1 admin, 2 live assessments going at the same time. There's 50 total enrollments. You've got 5 free smart import tokens to use to really get a feel for how the platform works. So yeah, guys, if you'd like to get on board and see what's happening and interact with the platform for free, head on over to certifyr.io and give it a try. I'll chat to you guys soon. Bye.